السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نيابة عن المركز الوطني للتعليم الإلكتروني نرحب بكم معنا في جلسة الشهادات المصغرة ودورها في تعزيز المهارات المستقبل. وأسعد أنا محدثكم الدكتور رامي بن إبراهيم السكران بإدارة الجلسة، والتي تأتي ضمن برنامج المؤتمر الدولي التعليم الإلكتروني لتنمية القدرات البشرية الذي ينظمه المركز الوطني للتعليم الإلكتروني خلال الفترة بين 24 و 27 من الشهر الحالي. علما بأن الترجمة الفورية متوفرة باللغة العربية لهذه الجلسة، الرجاء الضغط على أيقونة الترجمة في أسفل الشاشة إن رغبتم بذلك، وإن كان لديكم أسئلة يمكنكم وضعها في خانة الدردشة سواء في اللغة العربية أو باللغة الإنجليزية، وسيتم الرد على أسئلتكم في نهاية الورشة بإذن الله. Good evening from the capital of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh City. On behalf of the National E-Learning Center and the International Conference on E-Learning for Human Capability Development, we welcome you all to this session where we will be discussing micro-credentials and their role in enhancing future skills. Allow me to introduce myself as the moderator for this session. I'm Dr. Rami Sakran, and it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists for this session. With us tonight, our first speaker, Dr. Mark Brown. Dr. Brown is Ireland's first chair of digital learning and director of the National Institute for Digital Learning at Dublin City University. Dr. Brown is an EDEN fellow and serves as the management board of EDEN Digital Learning Europe. Our second speaker is Dr. John Domingo. Dr. Domingo is a professor of computer science at the Open University, director of the Knowledge Media Institute and the Technology Research and Innovation Center, and the president of STI International, a semantics-focused networking organization. Dr. Domingo has published over 280 referred articles in the areas of semantics, the web, disrupted ledgers, and e-learning. Our third speaker is Dr. Majda Shaqdar. Dr. Majda is currently the Director General for Training Department, Education and Training Evaluation Commission in Saudi Arabia. She has received her doctorate of business administration from Cardiff Metropolitan University and completed her postgraduate diploma in research management at Bradford University in the United Kingdom. Dr. Majda initiated the Quality and Evaluation Foundation Certificate, which is a certification program intended for evaluators, practitioners, and reviewers kingdom-wide. Last but not least, our fourth speaker is Mr. Alex Kaplan. Mr. Kaplan leads IBM's global work in digital credentials and an executive in IBM's blockchain and talent transformation organizations. Mr. Kaplan's work focuses on the transition from physical to digital credentials and the transition to skills-based economy. It is my pleasure to have you all together in this session, but before we kick off this discussion, here are a few guidelines for our audience. Interpretation is available in Arabic for this session, and you can activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your page. And at the end of the session, we will have about 15 minutes for Q&A. And if you have any questions, you may post them in the chat, either in Arabic or in English. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Mark Brown to start his presentation. Dr. Brown, the mic is with you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'll just load my slides here. If you just give me a second. It's a delight to be coming to you today virtually from Ireland. I'm based in Dublin, as you heard in my introduction, but I'm actually originally from New Zealand, if anyone is trying to figure out whether this is an Irish accent that you're hearing. So just to give you even more of an international flavor to today's event. My introductory presentation, very short, is really designed to just ask some introductory questions, which I'm sure my colleagues are going to expand upon in their own conversations and presentations, that we will then hopefully have a chance to respond to your own questions. So I'm going to keep this very simple and just ask 3 questions about micro-credentials that I'm sure are going to be woven through the conversation today. First, it's very hard not to ask the question, what is a micro-credential? I'm going to try and give you an answer. Then I'm going to ask, how come there is so much interest in micro-credentials right now? I predict 2022 will be the year of the micro-credential. And then I'm sure that some of the participants today are much more interested in how you actually go about implementing micro-credentials. I'll start that conversation with some examples and ideas, and I'm sure, again, we will pick that up in the other presentations and discussion. Before I get underway, though, I want to let you know that what I'm going to do is draw on, in the next few minutes, a very comprehensive literature review that my team and I completed last year on contract to the European Commission. We asked the why, the what, the who, the how, and the where of microcredentials with these 10 research questions. I will share a link to my slides at the end for anyone who wants to see those immediately afterwards, because I'm not expecting you to look at too much of the detail here. But I'm going to draw on elements of that literature review. Also, I'll share a link to what we call the Microcredential Observatory, because in our very thorough literature review, actually 87% of the publications we reviewed are already in the Microcredential Observatory. So it's a really good one-stop place to go and find literature about microcredentials at the moment. And then lastly, I will also share a link, or you can find in the Microcredential Observatory. This is my very most recent publication about microcredentials. So a little bit of self-publicity, but also a little bit of caution about microcredentials if this expression translates, if you like, in your culture to being a wolf potentially in sheep's clothes. And that might be something we expand upon. Without any further ado, though, what is a microcredential? A couple of years ago, we tried to explain microcredentials as simply as possible by using this diagram. It's a bit overly simplistic, but most of us are familiar with, I'll call them macro credentials. Our degrees, our master's degrees, our undergraduate degrees, they're accredited qualifications. So if we populate now the new and emerging credential ecology, so that language is really important. This is an ecosystem. We now have, and I'm making a very clear distinction between unbundled but credit-bearing microcredentials, as distinct from, as you'll see in the bottom quadrant, unbundled non-credit-bearing nano-credentials. These are just badges and certificates, whereas microcredentials in this definition, or this way of presenting them, have a much more formal or semi-formal stackable sort of idea around them. But not everyone would agree. And there's another really important distinction to be made in this conversation. I think we have to think about older types of microcredentials and now newer forms of microcredentials. So in 1833 in Canada, the St. John's introduced their first aid certificate for the very first time. The St. John's first aid certificate is highly credible. It meets the definition of a microcredential. It's certified. Last year, 2020, 500,000 Canadians completed a St. John's certificate. And in fact, in Toronto alone in 2019, 10,000 jobs required a St. John's certificate for employment purposes. So there's an example of an older type of microcredential. In Australia, a country of about 25 million people, last year it was estimated that 2.6 million, in a report that actually based on data from 2019, were already doing short course training bundles that would meet the definition of a microcredential. These were mainly in areas of like first aid and certificate training in vocational sort of forms of education. So microcredentials are not entirely new, but then I had the privilege to serve on the European Commission's expert panel around trying to produce a definition and an understanding, a whole of European understanding around, let's call these newer forms of microcredentials. So when we produced the report in December 2020, this is the definition of a microcredential that was produced by that group. And really importantly, proof of learning, it's a short learning, but against assessed and transparent standards. So these are quality assured, not just badges that sometimes people call warm body badges that have no currency. So that's the, I would say, working definition. But we don't have a global definition for microcredentials. Last year, UNESCO produced this report, which was a conversation towards a global common definition, but we're not there yet. So in answering the question, what is a micro-credential? It's actually difficult to say at this point in time. Perhaps we have one in Europe, but that certainly doesn't extend globally. In our analysis of the published literature, what we found is a very important distinction between some people who are positioning micro-credentials as alternative or supplements to existing macro-credentials, whereas others are trying to see them as something much more embedded in the literature. So I guess my conversation in finishing this first piece is, what word best encapsulates the meaning of a micro-credential for you? Is it a complementary or an alternative or supplementary qualification? Or do you really want to embed this in your qualification framework, as I'll give you an example of in a second? So moving on, because I'm very conscious of time here, why the level of interest in micro-credentials if we can't entirely define them yet? Well, there are many different, I'll call it, forces at work here. Some are drivers and some are attractors. So some are pushing and some are pulling. But it's certainly the case that most countries around the world have a challenge of engaging more adults in lifelong learning. And in Europe, the participation rate in lifelong learning is actually quite low. So that's a very important driver outside of employability, but nonetheless, a recognition that we need to upskill the workforce for the changing nature of the knowledge economy is a very important driver. In the World Economic Forum estimate 50% of jobs are going to need to be, or employees need to be, reskilled by 2025. I do think we need to be slightly critical of some of those claims nonetheless. There's also an argument, and this is particularly strong in the United States. The sheepskin effect of university education in particular is that it didn't really matter what type of degree you did in the past, as long as you got a degree and a degree from a good university. That was the sheepskin effect that gave you an advantage. There's now an argument that universities are no longer producing the type of graduates that are needed. And in the United States, the Trump administration signed an executive order where they are now employing federal workers on skills, not on degree qualifications anymore. So again, this is one of the arguments. When we analyze the published literature in this area, what we found is a balance between the forces of employability and lifelong learning, as I've mentioned, and a number of other things that you can see on the slide here that I don't have time to share. What I will do, though, is present the data in a slightly different way, the same data about the drivers. And what's interesting is what's not driving this. So equity, the promotion of the Sustainable Development Goals do not feature strongly in the literature, and nor does, despite some critical publications, these ideas that this is about unbundling education to make it into an economic commodity. In fact, if you want to read more about their very critical views of how perhaps micro-credentials are nothing more, to quote the publisher, the author, learning innovation theatre, I will give you a link to this publication. There's an argument that this is about reframing education as a commodity, something that can be sold and not a public good. Different countries have different viewpoints of this. The question is, are you wanting to introduce micro-credentials to create like the supermarket model of education where the learner gets to choose more than they do currently? The Coca-Cola that's sitting there in the trolley suggests that the learner doesn't always know what's entirely best for them, because we know that Coca-Cola is full of sugar and sugar isn't always good for us. Last part, I'm sure I'm almost out of time, if not over time, and apologies if I'm rushing here. How do you go about implementing micro-credentials? Well, I'm going to think kind of at the bigger picture level. This is one of the publications. I'm not expecting you to go with the detail here, but it's one of the publications that talks about different business models. And I do think we have to talk about the business models. So when we analyze the business models being adopted in the literature, at the moment, the vast majority of the publications, remember the publications don't necessarily match practice, it's just what's been published, but the vast majority of publications talk about a sole institution, a single university, typically introducing micro-credentials. despite the fact there are many other business models, industry-led, delivery through MOOCs, co-construction with industry partners, and so forth. So at the moment, we're seeing a domination of single institutions. I think that's a missed opportunity. What we do know is that the MOOC platforms are very significant in this space. Last year, it's estimated there are over 1,600 micro-credentials being offered through the MOOC platforms, and many of those with industry partners, not just universities. So that's something to consider. Here in Dublin, we actually had Google launch free education certificates in partnership with Coursera to get people back to work as part of the efforts after the pandemic. So there's an example of no higher education institution involved whatsoever, industry taking the lead. Nonetheless, Ireland is quite interesting as a case study because we have a national micro-credentialing initiative being led by the Irish Universities Association. So all of the universities are launching micro-credentials in a national platform. And if we want to understand Ireland, Ireland is going down the path of a fully embedded model, not an alternative or supplementary model. This is our national qualification framework, which already accommodates micro-credentials. So we're very unique in Europe to have already a qualification framework that supports micro-credentials. Almost coming to the end, I thought I'd share this with you, and I'll put the link in the chat box again. This is Ontario in Canada that has launched a searchable engine where the universities have collaborated and the colleges with their micro-credentials. So learners can go to the search engine and look for what offerings are available within the province of Ontario in Canada. And so this is a very interesting example of giving learners more choice in how they might go about selecting their programs of study. I think I'm coming to my final slide with one to come with a wrap up. Is one other business model that I'm involved in is called the ECIU University, where 12 European universities, as well as Tec de Monterrey in Mexico, are collaborating to provide micro-credentials for our learners where they are co-developed amongst these 12 universities. So that's, again, a very different business model. So coming to a final comment I want to give at the end here, and this is a slightly critical view, is right now, micro-credentials in many respects are a data desert, and I suspect this kind of works for your environment. What I mean by that is we have quite conclusive data about the impact and the value that macro-credentials have on our individuals, the private benefits, as well as the public benefits to society. This comes from the annual Education at a Glance publication. We have essentially no data whatsoever to say that an investment in micro-credentials leads to both a personal benefit as well as a public benefit to society and your economy. There is a data desert in that area. So thank you. I'll stop on that note, and hopefully I'm not too much over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown, and thanks for actually hooking us from the beginning with these wonderful questions. And we have actually more questions from our audience, but we'll reserve them until the end of our session. Now, please allow me to welcome Dr. Domingo for his presentation. Dr. Domingo?
Thank you. Let me just, yeah, I think that's the right one. Yes. So hopefully you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
I will do my best to keep the time. So I'll need to give a bit of context in the beginning so you can see how biased my the comments I'm going to make are. I think that Mark gave a very good overview at the beginning. So I'm a professor at the Open University. I'm the director of the Open University's Research and Innovation Center. So we produce new technologies for the Open University to use. So I'll say a little bit about the Open University and give you a little bit about the overall strategy we adopt. So this talk is really about how technology can help in verifying micro-credentials in the digital certification that Mark mentioned. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions outside of the talk. So just a bit of context about the Open University. We're just over 50 years old. The word open means you do not need any qualifications to start studying with us. Although when you finish, our degrees are highly rated. So you can see in this slide, 34% of our students did not have sufficient qualifications to study at a standard university. We know about teaching at scale. We have over 200,000 students at the moment, and we've taught over 2 million students since we were set up. We have a social mission being available to everyone, and you can see that over a quarter of our students live in a deprived area, so have difficult contexts, and over 36,000 of our students have a disability, one or the other. Nevertheless, the materials we produce and our teaching is of high quality, and 75 of the top 100 FTSE companies use us. Just a couple of things on scale. We collaborate with the BBC. So if you ever see David Attenborough in any TV program, that's a co-production with us. So the latest program, Green Planet, which had towards 5 million viewers in the first episodes, we produced that. And you can see on the main BBC website here in the bottom left, you can get more materials from us, and you can actually do free learning or start a degree in relation to us. Back in 2012, 2013, we set up our own MOOC company, these massive open online courses companies. FutureLearn is the 4th largest in the world, last time I checked. It has 10 million learners at any one time. And here is, I just took a screen snapshot of this, is the micro-credentials page. So you see we're offering 49 micro-credentials in conjunction. It's a collaboration between FutureLearn and some partner. A lot of them are from the Open University. FutureLearn has, I think, 175 partners globally. But I'm going to spend the rest of the talk focusing on the technological side, which is my expertise. The other thing I would say is the Open University's just launched a new 5-year strategy, and technology is a big part of that. Part of the technology strategy is an AI strategy where we want to embed AI in our teaching in the medium term. We want to make all of our content machine understandable. We want machines to understand the communications with the students. On that, we'll deliver a number of AI services. The main one will be giving every OU student in the future their own personal AI to help them with learning. Okay, so let me start with the vision that we have. So the vision we have, which is actually comes from the blockchain world, is the idea of self-sovereignty. So I would expect that most people listening to this will have a digital identity, but I would bet that your digital identity either comes from your employer or the place that you studied, or from a large tech company such as Facebook or Google. Here we concern, because we're the Open University, we believe in social justice, we want to put the students in control and the students in the center. So we imagine a future where almost at birth, your certification goes onto the blockchain in a privacy preserving fashion. So if one believes in lifelong learning, as Mark mentioned, and we certainly do, you will not be learning at one institution. You'll be learning across many institutions. So then you can't have your accreditation for your learning to be sit in one place. So then it needs to be student controlled, but still verified. So we imagine in this future, your birth certificate goes on the blockchain, your vaccination certificates as a child. Brazil is already doing this for birth certificates. And then as you progress, more and more certification goes onto the blockchain. And when you're 16, you take over control from your parents or guardian. So this is a single source of truth that's regionally coordinated. So I've been involved in over the last few years in a £40 million project where we are looking at changing the way we accredit computer science in the United Kingdom. And as part of that, we came up with a new accreditation standard for computer science in conjunction with the Chartered Institute for Computing in the UK. And what we were prototyping is a national blockchain for computer science accreditation in the UK, where as different universities would offer the Institute of Coding badges, which is a mark of industrial relevance of the teaching and the competence of the students, those would go on to a blockchain. So within the consortium, there were 35 universities, all in England, and over 80 industrial partners, including IBM and Google. And here you can see a colleague of mine from Queen Mary University talking about an Institute of Coding accreditation, which sat on our blockchain for attending a boot camp. So we had the different forms of accreditation. We had some which we called gateway, to introduce people into computer science, which were somehow lightweight for smaller chunks, very small chunks of learning. And then we had extensions to degrees. On the smaller chunks of learning, we had experiments in also actually having physical badges to correlate with the blockchain badges. So here's a summer school that we run from the Open University. And then you can see all of our students who are learning AI and data science, they had a physical badge. Every time they completed a task within the summer school, one of their tutors would swipe the badge with a swipe card for completing the task. And then the color of the badge would change, which we found was very motivational for the students. But also this would be recorded forever on the blockchain. On the other side, from the gateway badges, we worked with Sphere, which is a global network of companies which look to have an accreditation standard which is industrially relevant and measures what we call competence, which is the ability of someone to carry out a task without making mistakes and without supervision. So they had a matrix of different competencies, which we mapped, and you can see in this figure, to nearly 800 badges. So these are badges which are accredited, which you can point to when you create your own accreditation, and they all sat on our blockchain. So one could be thinking, well, what can one do with this? So one of the things we explored is really the notion of student control, and I'll show you something in a moment. And the other is moving to one of those AIs that I had in their strategy at the beginning for the Open University. And this was something we called the dream machine. So which is, you can think of as an AI career coach. So the dream machine is students have a dream of a career they want to pursue. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a nurse. Or I'm taking these courses, what I can do. And an AI could help them with that. Now, as a very, very first step to this, we created this proof of concept. So here we have Michelle Brown, who's accumulating learning in different places. And then the system maps the skills that Michelle is acquiring in her accreditations verified on the blockchain to machine reading of jobs which are online, and then doing a semantic match between the two. So here is a map of where the jobs are in Europe. At the bottom are the jobs for which Michelle is nearly qualified for, but she may be missing one or more skills. In that case, the system looks for courses where the learning outcomes are semantically related to the skills that Michelle are missing, and then can point them to those. So you can see that there are some Institute of Coding courses and some external courses. So that's a sort of one view of the Dream Machine AI career coach. Here's another one which is in early stages, but we're about to set up a third stage exploration of this to look at setting up an ecosystem for this. So this is an early prototype of an app that students would get, where they control all of their certification. And here, the student has applied for a job in Tesco's, the company, and the students control which of the qualifications they can see. They may not want to share all of the qualifications, and for how long the potential employer can see them. So in this case, they can just see them for the duration of the interview and for some time afterwards, and then that they are wiped. So that was quite a dense run through, and I've really only scratched the surface. So we've been looking at blockchain technology since 2016 for accrediting students, and we really feel that there's The values is around student empowerment, and also the potential to really change the relationship between students, educators, employers, and governments. You'll see, if you look, and I'm advising one of these, that there are companies talking about decentralized universities. So if you think about any university, it's a set of services which happen to be in one place. There's administration, there are units which create high quality materials, there are units which deliver the learning to the students. One could think about disaggregating those and running them through the blockchain. There's a various technology for that. One of which is called a smart contract. The Open University 50 years ago disaggregated the creation of learning materials from the actual delivery. So we create the materials with one set of academics and the BBC amongst others, and then we have another set of academics that deliver the teaching for us. We think there are immense opportunities, including something that we're doing in the longer term, even the ability to set up universities in the middle of refugee camps with this type of technology and with the right framework. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Domingo. The Dream Machine definitely sounds very interesting and exciting, and I would love to read more about it. So, Dr. Domingo, please feel free if you have any links that you would like us to review, even with the audience, that I will be very grateful. Now, let me introduce our third speaker, Dr. Majda Shukdar. Dr. Majda, welcome to this session, and please go ahead and present your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rami. Thank you. I'm going to share the presentation with you now. Okay, so today I think that we are talking about the same topic, and there are many things that I'm going to share, shared by my colleagues previously, though I love the dream thing that talked about it in the last session. And my question here is the future will be micro. This is the question that maybe we can go through this session, the source session. We all believe now how the micro-credential really gaining increasing momentum around the globe and how we really need it. I'm going to skip some of the questions maybe that are already raised by my colleagues, like what are the micro-credentials and why we need it, and maybe we'll focus more why we need it in Saudi Arabia. So in the beginning, that we can clarify that there is a difference between the micro-credential and traditional education system, which talk about the certificate, diploma, and degrees, which mainly focus on the knowledge rather than the skills. Even though the skills maybe needs a very thorough system to be assessed to know exactly if this is what we are looking for or not. Looking for the landscape for the micro-credentials, we can think about more than one thing. It's about the lifelong learning, employability, and the new models of digital education, professional development. So this is, again, part of why we need it. And who care about this? Who are the stakeholders who really care about the micro-credentials, and they have the mutual equitable benefits for this one? Definitely, we are the learner are the first, whether they are a student or practitioner who actually have the bachelor degree, but they need more and more for their skills and building their profile. The employer, and this is the key, because the people who really needs to design exactly the kind of qualification from the micro-credential that they are looking for, in order that the learning outcomes from this micro-credential will meet their requirements to meet their needs in their business. Now, the providers like universities or other institutes, they have to have exactly how they can design the learning outcomes according to the needs, whether the learner or the employer. Then the policymaker, which is not easy to change now a lot of policies about this one, and to ensure that they are finally tuned and can be adjusted to meet the new challenge and incentivized appropriately behaviorally by all parties. Because sometimes you will find some institution or some authority that they will recognize it, but the others maybe will not believe in it. And this is one of the challenges that can face the micro-credential. So again, for the students, they are quality driven, and it needs to be updated and accessible. Definitely for the traditional certificate or for the 4 years in the higher education, the update is really very slow, and it's not really meeting the requirements of the business and the very rapid changes in the technology and or in the business and industry. Employers, they need to be more flexible, focused, and clear. For the higher education, they need to have it efficient, reliable, and less bureaucratic. For the regulators, they need to have it standardized and employability driven and integrated. I can see one of the questions already in the Q&A that that the employer or the business owner, they are the one who can design really the learning outcomes in order that they can develop. So there is a challenge and many questions. Is the seat time in the traditional education will meet? Is there any connection between this time and education for 4 years or 5 years? And does the higher education always possess a specific skills associated with the needs of employee to be ready for the work? And the last thing is the employer or the labor market needs a specific skills to be satisfied. So this is the gap that we need really to focus on in order that we can see where exactly the micro credential can come and to be very important. And maybe it's an urgent solution for many of the gaps that we face, especially with a very rapid changing in the business. Where it comes from, actually, it will come from both employer and employee and the student who are looking to break into a particular industry or post-graduation. Like what my colleague said before, the dream, they want to have something, although that they depend mainly on the digital or actually in the e-learning, which again, this is a challenge because many skills, especially for the practice like the doctors, engineer, they need to have skills that they have. That simulation is not enough, but they need more and more, but at least they can reach the simulation through this one. So what are the micro credentials? There are many definitions, but we can say that it's a competency-based learning model. So it's really focused on the competency and skill. It's a certification style qualification that individuals choose to study, improve their skill, and rapid upscaling found in the particular industry area. It's a very specific that can be. It's a short, low-cost online courses and can be accumulated into larger credential and become part of the personal profile. So personal portfolio. So we are, even as an adult learning now, with this chance is open to us, especially with the last 2 years during the COVID. I'm sure that most of us actually going for the e-learning and for this micro credential, and we found that we really collect a lot of certificates that really build another portfolio in our career. Understanding of this one, I'm gonna skip maybe some of the. This is a different definition from different organization. So one of these actually, like UNESCO, they put it like an umbrella that encompasses the nano degrees, micro masters, credentials, certificate, badges, and license and endorsements. OECD, they put it like an alternative credential, which is very reliable definition. The European definition, it's a short learning experience and assist against transparent standard. This is one of the challenge. It really needs to be accredited, which is not yet grow. At least if I talk about Saudi Arabia here, we still in the beginning of to have the standard to assess this micro credential. Okay, I'm going to go for this one. This is how the process that we design it. The process starts, as I mentioned, that it's from the student and the employer, and it's vice versa, going to the regulators, and they have to define the standard in order from the beginning how they designed the higher education, and they design the learning outcomes and what will be the outcome by the student who will hold this certificate. As I mentioned here, that it's driven by people, not by the universities as the traditional education. So the challenges, as I mentioned before, one of these is the differences between the universities. Some of them will recognize certain credentials, other not. They will differ in the number of hours or the content that they will deliver, what could be the skills and the competency that they will design this one. And the most important thing or challenges is the accreditation standard that they will adopt, and the regulatory body will accept it in order that to recognize such a credential. And why do we need it in this world? Definitely, it's one of this is the lifelong learning, and this is one of what we adopted now in Saudi Arabia, and there is a very low participation in Europe, and this is mentioned even before in the first by Dr. Mark and the first speaker. The second thing why we need it, it's the COVID-19 crisis. Definitely this leaves us a legacy that we need to have it. The digital disruption, sustainable society, and university, actually, they redesign now the higher education learning and the skills outcome. They become more focused about the competency rather than the knowledge that we are looking for. Again, it's the new job market. As we all know that there are many jobs in the coming, actually, until 2030, there are jobs that will be actually disappear and many new jobs that will come. So maybe the time in order to go for the traditional certificate and change this will take a long time, while the micro-credential can fill this gap as soon as possible. So as I mentioned, it's the new top skills that we know it by the World Economic 2020 has identified these skills for the future. And we have, I think, a research that published, I think, last month to define what are or identify what are the skills that is needed in Saudi Arabia according to the new market demand and the jobs reshaping. Now, actually, the regular jobs that we used to have it now, it's changed, and the requirement change, especially with the parallel change or rapid change in the technology that we are living it. According to the European Commission in 2019 through Industry 4, it's predicted that 50% of all employees will need a reskilling by 2025. And over the next decade, along with the growing impact of digitalization, and this is a fact that we have to face. Again, across the world, as I mean, this is a lot of definitions, but I just focus on Singapore, that they developed the skills framework, because this is what we adopted in Saudi Arabia. In a few seconds, I'm going to talk about it. It's the National Skills Framework. Why do we need it in Saudi Arabia? Because we have the vision of 2030. All we know about our vision and about the strategic objectives. We have the ambitious nation, thriving economy, and vibrant society. You can see that we are talking about the international citizen or the globally competitive citizen. So we are talking about the person who really needs a core capabilities to foster the adaptability and flexibility. This is part of the human capability development that focus focus on the values and attitude and the basic skills of the future. So this is what we really need, and we are in need in Saudi Arabia for this one. This is one of the HCVD or HCDB, actually, the Human Capability Development Program. This is one of the VRB program, the Vision Realization Program, which include 86 initiatives. It's all talking about the Human Capability Development Program. So just for the sake of time, I'm gonna just with this one, I select some objectives that really in parallel or compatible with the needs of the micro-credentials, which is build lifelong learning journey, ensure alignment of education outputs with the labor market needs, expand the vocational training to provide for labor market needs, and improve readiness of youth to enter the labor market. So this is a basic objective of our HCDB program. Again, for the initiative, develop the knowledge and skills needed to invest in the future opportunities, providing opportunities for those outside the education system and supporting them to continue their education. This is what we are talking about, the global citizen now, and talking about that everybody has an equitable or equal right to have the skills needed for him to build his capacity, and even to reward, actually, or to be rewarded for this one and participate in our on the Vision Realization Program. By any means, they will have a role. So I'm gonna just, maybe this is a very long one. I keep it here just for my colleagues just to know about it in Saudi Arabia. But I want to focus on this one. There's a description of the initiative, actually preparing for the future labor market locally and globally. It includes 27 initiatives. There is actually a description of this initiative, implementation of a pilot program to allow students to design their degrees according to their inclinations and desires. So this is a chance for the student themselves that they can design exactly the certificate or the skills that they need to have it according to the goals that they plan it. and direct strategic goal to ensure alignment between education learning outcomes and the market needs of in the work. Again, providing the lifelong learning opportunities. This is including 18 initiatives that, again, it focus on skills continuously and upskilling. Again, the second thing is rehabilitation of the unemployed looking for work and those exposed to lose their jobs and reskilling, especially if we return back to the COVID-19 year in 2020. A lot of people who lose their jobs. I think they need more and more to get back, maybe in another role. For the initiative, they again they have a designing skills development and rehabilitation programs. Most of them talking about the skills accelerator, short university program, micro and nano programs, digital skill programs for adults, corporate skills development program for digital entrepreneurial companies, short lessons to teach foreign language and raise awareness of other cultures, and develop governance for licensing, private and government training initiations. Again, creation of skills and accreditation system. Here is the main thing, which is design the national skills framework. We have the national qualification framework, but now this is one of the initiatives that even ETIC is responsible for this initiative, which is design the national skills framework. How we can develop accredited short university degrees, and how can we obtain professional specialization in demand in the labor market, like cybersecurity and others that now it appears. The last takeaway message is that although micro-credentials are delivered as a bite-sized chunk illustrating the proficiency in particular skills, though it's questionable, we need really to know exactly are the skills that we will have it, or the people who will get this skills, they will be able and capable to do the work, especially as I mentioned, there is a very critical jobs or role that it needs a practice, which is one of this, like for example, the medical field, all of the medical fields, they need really to practice this and in the field. So maybe they can get it in the simulation, they will get the knowledge and skills they needed, but they have to practice. And this is one of the thing of the maybe the research that we really look at it and what could be the alternative in order to have the micro-credential properly designed and the outcome will be properly expected to meet the labor market needs. Thank you very much, and I hope that I meet my time. I really was not looking to the time. So, Dr. Rami, are we?
Yes, no worries, Dr. Majda. Thanks a lot. We've actually received multiple questions, but again, we'll reserve them till the end of our session. And now let me welcome Mr. Alex Kaplan to start his presentation. Mr. Kaplan?
Yes, thank you all very much. And it's great to be here this morning. Actually, I guess it's this evening for you all.
Yes.
So I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on this because IBM is involved in actually creating a system. I would like to share my slides.
Yes,
but
Dr. Majda, please forgive me, Mr. Kaplan. Dr. Majda, if you can stop sharing, that way Mr. Kaplan can share his piece.
Is it now stopped, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Great. Now we're in good shape here. So IBM has been actively involved in actually building and deploying a blockchain-based system to support credentials and micro-credentials. So I'm going to spend my time today talking a little bit about the work that IBM has actually been involved in. So the reason that we got involved in creating a digital credentials-based system is to address inefficiencies in the learning to earning pipeline. It's a very inefficient system today when you think about the talent marketplace, around people looking for work, around employers looking for people who have the credentials and the skills that are needed to be successful in their jobs. And it was our belief that we could improve the efficiency of that system through the application of various technologies. So our focus is really on empowering individuals with the information that they need in order to understand the career options that are in front of them, in order to understand what kind of gaps they might have in terms of their skills as they relate to the career choices that they're making, to be able to find educational opportunities to fill those kind of gaps, and then ultimately to use that information in order to help them get jobs. So I've been, very pleased that I've had the opportunity to work both in the United States and globally on this topic, and in really understanding the issues around the talent marketplace that makes it more difficult to connect workers with jobs. So the Learning Credential Network is an ecosystem that we put together that's brought together employers and academic institutions to deeply think around the technological infrastructure that would be required to connect learners and earners with jobs. And it's based upon work that we did back in 2020 around learning and employment records. So a learning and employment record is a secure and detailed record of verified achievements that can easily be transferred from one job or learning experience to another. This concept was deeply explored as part of the work sponsored by the White House and the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. It was led by Ivanka Trump during the previous administration, and was sponsored by the United States Department of Commerce. I was responsible for leading IBM's work with the board and the thinking around what an infrastructure would look like for learning and employment records. So we have built a learning and employment record compliant platform because we really wanted to understand the technological issues required to enable the objectives that my colleagues have already talked about in terms of credentials and micro-credentials. And we're really very focused on this connection between the learner-earner, between employers, and between education and training providers. The core functions of the work that we're doing based upon the blockchain are to provide a global distributed ledger technology where individuals and organizations can share credentials. And we think about credentials not only as, larger credentials like an academic degree, but equally important, we think about them as micro-credentials like we have all been discussing at this point. So this blockchain-based solution allows for the issuance of credentials based upon emerging standards around credentials. It's thought very deeply about the payload of the credential itself so that one can understand who issued it, what kind of skills the person had attained when they received the credential. And of course, because this is all on blockchain, it's completely transparent and auditable by anybody who has permission to use the blockchain. A second primary focus of it is around the management and exchange of credentials. It's our expectation that there will be multiple systems that'll be available to employers and users around the world around skills-based credentials and micro-credentials. And so it's essential that people can have a seamless and easy experience as they manage those credentials from their cradle to career journey. We wanted to provide capability to have those credentials be searched by employers. So if employers are looking for somebody with, let's say, a background in cybersecurity, they can see what kind of credentials are available for them, what kind of people have those kind of credentials. It's essential that the solution be able to definitively verify credentials. One of the big challenges in the adoption of credentials is that surveys tell us that up to 30% of information people provide about their skills-based information ranges from fraudulent to aspirational. And if we're going to make consequential decisions around hiring or promotion or admission, we need to know that the credentials being presented are accurate and verifiable. And finally, it plugs into what we call compassing tools, which really address career pathways and the ability for an individual to understand if they want to go in a certain career direction, exactly what kind of skills they're going to need and what gaps that they have in order to meet those skills. So the idea here is that we want to empower the participants. There are really three primary participants in this ecosystem, and we think this applies to all credentials and to micro-credentials. There are the issuers of the credentials. Those can be employers. IBM has one of the largest digital badge programs of any company in the world. We've issued over 3 million of those credentials since we began our work on it about 4 years ago. It's well embraced by our employee population. So we, like academic institutions, are credential issuers. There are the holders of the credentials themselves, and those could be employees, those could be learners, but it's an individual who has a wallet, and in that wallet, there's information about their credentials. And then, of course, there are the verifiers. And again, these could be employers, they could be other academic institutions, but an organization who wants to know that the information that's being provided is verifiable and is true and accurate. So we want to empower everybody with technological capability to manage what could be billions of credentials across hundreds of millions of issuers and owners here. So as we talk about the credential holders, the idea here is that we believe that each individual should have a wallet. We think that those wallets should be based upon the concepts of digital self-sovereignty as has been previously discussed. And that as a holder, I can see within my wallet the credentials that I earn from any academic institution where I received a degree or a training course like a coding camp, or work that I did in an employer that resulted in a badge. But the idea is that within this wallet, it should be the single point where all credentials can be brought together. And that is an individual I can control and permission who gets to see those credentials, who gets to use those credentials. So it's entirely up to me what I share, what level of depth I share of those credentials, who I share those with. And that really respects the concepts of digital self-sovereignty that are critical to, we think, the adoption of credentials by holders. The issuers themselves need to have a very efficient way to issue credentials onto the blockchain. This means agreements around standards as they relate to what the definition of a credential is, the specification for how those credentials should be working together. And so we're very involved with the standards-based community, IEEE, IMS Global, the European Commission, and others who are working on issues around standards and standardization as they relate to credentials. And of course, we think that that's just an absolutely essential component of the work that needs to happen here. So the credential issuers are a really important part of all of this. In addition to the issuers, then, as I'd mentioned previously, we have the requesters and the verifiers. And again, the idea is to allow people to decide, hey, I'd like to share information about myself with the larger community. Employers ought to be able to come in and search that database, and then anonymously reach out and to an individual who has the skills that an employer could be working for, and see if they might like to have a deeper discussion around the credentials themselves. So, when you think about this in action, the idea is that we're empowering a person with the credentials based upon the skills that they're earning in an academic degree. That individual is then using those credentials in order to understand career pathways that are in front of them, both from the skills that they've had, as well as the education they've received, be able to identify where there are gaps in their skills base and be pointed towards academic opportunities to fill those gaps, then to use those, use that information to apply for a job and for an employer to be able to identify somebody and offer them employment to move forward with their career. Just lastly, this is all built upon standard career frameworks that align skills to careers. That's both true in the United States as well as globally. There's a lot of work going on in terms of this standardization of career frameworks. They're an essential component of the work that needs to be done for this to be adopted on a global level. And in addition, there's a lot of work at the technological layer on blockchain, artificial intelligence, self-sovereign identity that's critical to this working at scale. So the idea here is, we've created a solution. We've actually built this software, this technology that really makes sure that all the participants realize the benefits and the promise of all the work that myself and my colleagues here on the phone have been discussing. So I appreciate the opportunity, and please feel free to reach out to me directly with any questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kaplan, for these insightful information and data. I will definitely go back to the point that you mentioned for the wallet and the credentials. But let me circle back to Dr. Brown and start with the first question that we've received. Dr. Brown, when it comes to the challenges, now you mentioned the definition of micro-credentials, and you mentioned and how to implement micro-credentials. Now, when we talk about challenges, what are the key challenges in designing micro-credentials?
Well, where do I start? Because the challenges operate at each level of the education system. I think taking a sort of ecosystem view of this is helpful. So we have macro level challenges. There are challenges for governments, for regulatory bodies, for those who manage the current credential ecology. And some of those bodies, their job is not necessarily to open up that credential ecology, because they've often taken a very quality assurance approach to protect the integrity of existing macro credentials in particular. At a meso level, you've got challenges related to the institutions, but I need to use the word institution alongside organization, because you saw in my talk that there's a bias at the moment towards the university sector in particular. And I made the comment that we would be missing the opportunity if we didn't engage more with industry partners. And you've heard from the talks about how industry itself is leading in this area. So one of the challenges is how you bring those conversations together within some kind of standardized framework that gives it currency at the institutional level, and collaboration across institutions, which you heard me talk about both within Ireland, but across Europe as well. And then if I use a micro level sort of suite of challenges or collection of challenges, you really have to bring your academic community, those who are developing and designing the credentials with you, because there is a concern that these are just warm body badges. They have no currency. Currency, like credentials, are like money in some respects. It has benefits. And if micro-credentials don't have those benefits, which is why we do need to have the research that substantiates the benefits that come from the shorter form of professional learning, then the term micro-credential could well become quite tainted in many respects. And some of our elite universities are not necessarily adopting a more embedded approach, because if they do, that might challenge the foundation of their existing macro credentials. By opening up these new pathways for learning and giving them recognition and currency, that threatens traditional universities. So that's a challenge, a push and a pull tension, if you like. So I'll stop on that note, but those challenges and opportunities, we should emphasize, operate at different levels of the system.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dr. Brown. Definitely these challenges will require a lot of work when it comes to the collaboration and the integration and the innovation itself. Now, let me go back to Dr. Domingo. And Dr. Domingo, you've mentioned what the word open means in the name of the university, and you brought up the example of crediting computer science. Now, talking about credits, what are the mechanisms that micro-credentials are given credit in the university in the UK?
So, the sad answer is we don't have, let's say, a national framework for micro-credentials in the UK. There is the European standard that came up from the MOOC companies of a micro-credential, and of which Future Learners are part. And in that standard, a micro-credential equals 10 to 15 credits. So it equals 100 to 150 hours worth of learning. If you look on the Future Learn website, if you Google Future Learn and micro-credentials, you'll see that all the micro-credentials offered are in conjunction with a university in the UK, or in conjunction with both a university and a company. So these are, let's say, single relationships for a micro-credential which is presented, backed by a particular university in this instance.
Very clear. Thanks a lot, Dr. Domingo. Let me link this thought and move to Dr. Majda. Dr. Majda, some of the challenges that Dr. Brown actually kind of crossed with the challenges that you mentioned in your presentation, and some of the thoughts that Dr. Domingo also mentioned also aligns with your presentation. Now, talking about the demand when it comes to the market itself, do you see a demand for micro-credentials in Saudi Arabia?
I can see that this is very clear. You know, Dr. Rami, and everybody knows about now the Human Capability Development Program that already launched, I think, last month. And there are many initiatives mentioned how really we are in need for this one, especially for the long life learning and especially for the needed skills. And that's why one of the initiatives is to develop the Saudi, or actually the National Skills Framework. And this is assigned to ETIC. ETIC is Education and Training Evaluation Commission. And this will be like an assessment tool. Not only, I mean, this assessment tool can even help or support the learner to know exactly what are the skills they needed. And then there will be like a skills dictionary or registry. His Excellency in the opening session, he mentioned this one, Dr. Hamad Al-Sheikh and Dr. Khalid Al-Sabti, they mentioned that we will have like a skills dictionary. And not only this, in collaboration with you and the NELC, and they will be a program or educational program that can fulfill the requirements of those needs. And later on, the business owner, or actually the market, will really put the design for this learning outcomes. So the skills will be known, and then what exactly the other programs that can fit or fulfill the requirements for this one.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Magda. Let me just say this is extremely exciting, and we're very, very eager to see what's going to happen in the upcoming years for this work. Now, Mr. Kaplan, we talked about challenges, we talked about credit, and we talked about the demand. Now, when it comes to the recognition and acceptance from an industry perspective, how do you see the recognition and acceptance of micro-credentials?
Well, I think it's really growing. I mean, I think we're using it for two primary purposes. One, we're using it as part of our talent acquisition process to understand the definitive skills that people have, so that as we review candidates for our jobs, we can verify the fact that they have the skills that are bringing forward. This is particularly true in industries that have a high requirement for verified skills: healthcare, mining, oil and gas, veterinary. There's a lot of job categories where you need to prove that you've got the skill. So, and it accelerates the talent acquisition process and makes it more efficient. We're using it a lot for career path work inside of our company, and many other companies are doing the same. And so what's happening is we're looking at the validated skills and credentials that people have, and using those to determine whether or not they have skills necessary for promotion, help give them guidance on the skills they need to stay current in their jobs for the future. And increasingly, we're seeing our customers ask for definitive proof, verified skills before they're assigned to projects. And so we are looking at, some of our projects now actually require that you provide proof of verified skills to be able to be assigned. So it's becoming much more predominant. And we see this in all of our clients as well. Is a strong push to using credentials and micro-credentials as a basis to discern, for making these consequential decisions around hiring, job assignments, and promotion.
Well noted, Mr. Kaplan. Dr. Brown, let me go back to you and kind of recap a bit on this. Now we talked about the challenges, the credits, and the demand, also about the recognition, the acceptance. Let me ask you something, maybe it's actually more behavioral and social. How is the academia and industry acceptance for micro-credentials?
I think we have to be careful. I often quote someone that once said, all generalizations are dangerous, including this one. What we are seeing is a distinction around the globe between developed countries and developing countries. And in some respects, even within Europe, we're seeing more mature European countries where the education system is more mature, advancing with micro-credentials. Ireland is an example. The Netherlands is another very good example. They have a national blockchain pilot for micro-credentialing. So there are different drivers. I'm working with a couple of countries in Latin America where their interest in micro-credentials is actually about getting people from secondary education into higher education. Whereas in Ireland, our interest primarily in micro-credentials is about continuing professional development and reskilling and upskilling for the new economy. So I think context is really important here. But when we are talking about university education, my own university has established a unit and a director of micro-credentials. So we've put the infrastructure in alongside of the national platform, but we would have some of our academic community who would say that these are not real qualifications. You have to get a real degree from a good university for it to have currency. So that's one of the reasons why I keep using that word currency. And there is going to be some tensions around, we already see this between people who have the skills and they don't need to go through traditional pathways for education. So for me, education is critical to this. In 2020, we conducted a national survey of employers. There are some of these surveys that have been conducted in other countries. In Ireland, only less than 50% of employers had ever heard of a micro-credential, and they certainly didn't know how they would treat it in the recruitment process. In our major literature review, and I'll finish on this note, in our major literature review of the various stakeholders that are crucial in the micro-credential sort of sector, or the discussions about micro-credentials, the group that is typically overlooked are the HR companies, the companies that are heavily involved in the recruitment process. If you want to help and educate people what and how to equate a micro-credential against other kinds of learning and skills, those people need to be part of that conversation and actually help shape the credential ecology. So to date, there are next to no studies that are looking at from that side. There's just one line of research in the US. So if you're wanting to do something nationally in Saudi Arabia, make sure that those companies that are involved in the recruitment process are part of the conversation and are educated about what the goal and intention is.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Brown. This is extremely important because what you just mentioned actually require a lot of work when it comes to the policy making, the decision making itself, and maybe some kind of social change when it comes to that perspective for micro credentials. Now, Dr. Domingo, I would like to keep this thought running and talk about the framework and policy. And let me repeat what you mentioned earlier. You did mention there is no framework or policy in place. If I understood that correctly, why there is no framework? Why not?
So one thing I put in an answer to a question. So in general, the education sector tends to be laggard with respect to other sectors. So if you compare what's happening, especially technologically, compared to music or shopping, we're behind. As I mentioned in my previous answer, the European MOOC companies came together and came up with what they call the Common Micro-Credential Framework. And I've put a link to that in the local chat. But what we do have, when the Boris Johnson-led government was elected back in 2019, seems like a long time ago, before a pandemic appeared, one of the strong elements of their pitch was what they call the levelling up agenda. So if you look at the UK, there's a great disparity in economically and also in skills between the south around London and the north. And if you look at the government papers around levelling up, they pretty much always talk about a skills agenda and loosening up. So I would say at the government level, there is discussion, but nothing specific around micro-credentials. As I said, the OU has been pushing for this in discussion with government, but I'm not aware of anything at the moment. But I struggle to understand how we can level up in 2022 and increase employability, which is a strong UK objective, without something more flexible, like micro-credentials.
Very clear. Thanks a lot, Dr. Domingo. Now, this question might be a bit, we don't want to put pressure on you, Dr. Majda, but a lot of questions in here that are actually from Saudi Arabia, and they talk about the same thing when it comes to the policy making and the standards itself. So how does e-tech support micro-credentials in Saudi Arabia?
Okay, I can start by, first of all, ETIC, it's an accreditation authority. So first we have to have the Ministry of Education to recognize this as part of the certificate. And then later on, the accreditation will come as a next step. Definitely, this will be the plan. But until now, it's, as under discussion, and we are still developing. When we said we is in Saudi Arabia, we are still discuss this one. And then when there is a regulations or the policy, all the stakeholders or the policy maker would sit together and know exactly how they can really make the accreditation standard for this one. So we are still in the beginning.
Very clear, Dr. Majda. And hopefully with all the work that, e-tech, NLC, the Ministry of Education, the Human Capital Development Program together, I believe we can move faster, and hopefully we'll be recognized and maybe the benchmark when it comes to micro-credentials. Now, let me ask the last question to Mr. Kaplan. What are the recommendations that you have for academia to adopt micro-credentials designed by the industry?
Well, there needs to be a very tight collaboration between academia and industry to understand the career pathways and the kinds of jobs that are both available and becoming available in the future. So I think that this is really a dialogue, and it's an important one to have. I think it's important that industry comes together at the industry level. We've done a lot of work, obviously, with our colleagues across the IT industry and Microsoft and Cisco and Google and Amazon and others, to provide clear pathways and clear definitions around the types of skills that are required and how we understand those skills in the IT industry. In the United States, Walmart is leading a similar initiative in retail. There's a lot of work going on in veterinary medicine. There's a lot of it already coded out in health. So I think the industry itself needs to come together and define what skills are required, and then work collaboratively with the academic institutions on how they need to define and to discuss the specific skills, and then see that reflected back in the credentials that these institutions are working with on the industry layer. We tend to see this happening in the United States. It's happening at a more regional level. We don't have a strong national approach to this kind of issue, so this is really being led at the national level by industry groups and large corporations and by ours. But I think that's the essential component to all of it is this collaboration. Over time, what I think is going to happen is we have a very strong movement in the United States around creating an infrastructure allows for the sort of the comparison of credentials between each other. There's an organization called Credential Engines that's working on this. We think that over time, artificial intelligence can really resolve this issue of saying, this credential equals that credential, because at the heart of it, that's really a database and conversion kind of problem. Almost think of it very similar, frankly, to currency conversions. And so we think that over time that the infrastructure will build itself, that there'll be enough normalization between what credentials are called that are agreed upon by both academia and industry, and that will use advanced technological tools in order to do the crosswalks.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kaplan. What a session to actually close up this conference with. This is extremely insightful and very extremely helpful for many of us, including our audience. We have many questions actually that we received, but we cannot answer them due to the time. We are at the end of our session, and I would like to thank our distinguished speakers for this insightful session and our audience for being very interactive during the session. Once again, Dr. Mark Brown, Dr. John Domingo, Dr. Majda Shukdar, Mr. Alex Kaplan, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, This brings us to the end of this wonderful international conference on e-learning for human capability development that represented over 30 national and international speakers engaged in 4 days, 6 panel sessions, 7 workshops, and more than 30,000 participants from more than 40 countries. We thank you all on behalf of the National E-Learning Center and the International Conference on E-Learning for Human Capability Development for making this event such a grand success. See you in the next edition in the conference in 2023 from Riyadh City, from the heart of NELC building. Thank you so much. Have a great night, and نودعكم الله وبحفظ الله وسلامته وشكرا لكم جميعا.
Thank you very much.